Hello, welcome back. Let's bring you more on the G20 summit. Rishi Sunak has met the Indian Prime Minister in New Delhi. The long-awaited free trade deal between the UK and India set to have been top of the agenda. Let's talk to Evie Aspinall, who's director of the British Foreign Policy Group. Very good to see you on the programme today. I mean, is that top of the list rather than Ukraine, the free trade deal?
I think we've now kind of had some of the biggest conversations around Ukraine that we'll have. They're kind of in the centre of the conversations at the main summit itself. If we now look towards the kind of bilateral conversations that we'll be having, particularly with India, free trade is now kind of top of the agenda, though I'm not convinced that we're going to see too much progress at the summit on it.
Why not? What's the sticking points?
I mean, there's quite a few, but I mean, number one really is a question around migration. So India is still pushing quite hard for conversations around visas for Indian students to kind of come over to the UK. As we know, migration is a big hot topic in the UK at the moment. And I think there's a lack of commitment and desire within the Conservative government to kind of allow any concessions on migration at the moment, which is proposing a real challenge for kind of getting the deal over the line.
We did hear from the Prime Minister admitting that they need more time to reach an agreement. Is an agreement possible?
I don't think it's impossible, but I think realistically that question of migration, someone's got to budge. And at the moment, the political dynamics, I don't think it's particularly likely, especially in the run up to an election, a Conservative government who's going to go quite hard on migration and trying to tackle migration. It's one of Sunak's biggest priorities. I don't think he's going to have the backing within the Conservative Party to really push this over the line ahead of the election unless India makes some concessions on migration.
I see. So this has been pushed into the long grass, as they say.
I think it very much could be. It really does depend kind of if India comes to the negotiating table. If this really is what India wants, then I don't see a particular route forward at this present point of time.
How are relations between the UK and India as we speak?
I think they're actually broadly pretty good. You do see that Rishi Sunak got a great reception when he landed in India, and we do see that kind of that his heritage is proving to be a real benefit in kind of some of these conversations. And I know kind of in the Indian diaspora in the UK, there's a lot of pride in his heritage. Kind of going into these conversations, and I think that's a real benefit for the UK.
Can we talk about relations with Ukraine and Russia? The group of G20 adopting this consensus that avoided condemnation of Russia, calling, though, on all states to refrain from the use of force to seize territory. Can that be seen as some kind of breakthrough?
I know Rishi Sunak is quite keen to position it as one. I personally think that it's pretty soft on Ukraine. It probably always was going to be. Russia went in very forthright into these conversations. Lavrov had said that they wouldn't agree to an agreement that didn't align with Russia's stance on Ukraine. So if they wanted agreement on kind of anything else, it was quite clear that Ukraine was going to have to be pushed to the side. For me, the language is quite soft. It doesn't really condemn Russian aggression at all, in a way that the last summit in Indonesia, we did see a bit more condemnation. I think this is quite soft for me.
So we always have words coming out, don't we, all these communiques as they're styled from such summits, but not much substance, nothing gets acted on, or very little, it seems.
I think that, yeah, one of the biggest challenges, particularly with the G20, you've got such a diverse range of nations. Getting 20 nations now 21 to kind of agree on something is really quite challenging. Russia, China, the UK, India, all very different perspectives. And actually some of the most interesting conversations are happening in the bilaterals, the one-on-one conversations that we're able to have, for example, with India on the free trade agreement, with European partners perhaps on Horizon Europe. Those are actually often more interesting than the communique itself, which, as you say, can often be a bit wishy-washy.
And very briefly, you mentioned 21, G21, I suppose it could be called. That's the African Union has been adopted. How interesting is that?
It's very interesting. I think it's something that's been talked about for a long time, the need to bring in a kind of diversity of voices, because the G20 has really focused on the top economies historically. India will see this as a big win. It's tried to really position itself in recent years as kind of a champion of the developing nations, and bringing out the African Union into that will be a real selling point for India moving forwards, of its kind of diplomatic prowess. And yet, long term for the G20, brilliant to bring kind of some more voices to the conversation.
All right, we'll see where it goes from here. Evie Aspinall, lovely to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much.
Right, is it pretty hot on the weather front? Let's find out.
warm memories wherever you go.